what is always an issue for 3D print is whether or not your model is thick enough, or all of it is thick enough. For instance, I have a little guy here. If I were to print him a lot smaller, his neck would become thinner and thinner, and at some point it would become so fragile that you can't really print it anymore on a 3D printer. Or maybe you can even print it, but you can't send it to someone in the mail without having it break. That's one of the reasons there's always a lower limit for how thin things can be in a 3D print. Inside Blender there's a lot of ways that we can check it. There's a couple of ways in which we can fix it, and I'd like to show you some of them. The image you're looking at here on the left is one that I made a couple of years ago. It's called the Scout. It was part of a very small series of 2 images, and in it is a deer model, or a stag. Let's have a look at this model because it has a couple of very thin parts, which I think might be a problem with printing. Before we can check the thickness, we have to know what we're measuring in. So we have to set up Blender to have the correct scale and the model to be the scale that we want to print him at. Currently, in this file, it has not been set up at all. So we can see the dimension of the stag is 10 Blender units in the Z direction. So it's 10 tall, but we don't know 10 what. To set it up, we can go to the Scene buttons. In the Unit panel, we enable Metric, and that makes the stag 10 meters tall. So 1 Blender unit becomes 1 meter, and it's 10 meters tall. I happen to know that the 3D printers I like to work with, both machines and services, like to work in millimeters. To make it work in millimeters, I say it's 0.001 as a scale factor. This means 1 unit becomes 1 millimeter. And my stag is, instead of 10 meters tall, becomes 10 millimeters tall, which is 1 centimeter. Well, that's a little bit small to go printing, so let's make him 10 centimeters maybe. I will scale him, click on S and type 10 on my keyboard and enter. That makes him 10 times larger. The scale, however, is now also at 10, which I don't want. I always want the scale factor to be 1 on the final model. To get rid of that, we can apply the scale via the menu. See, the scale is now 111, but the size is nicely 10 centimeters tall. I know now how big the stag is. I know my units, so I can start measuring. I want to show you 4 different ways to check wall thickness. Actually, I can show you 5 different ways to check wall thickness, and I will start with the oldest and work to the newer ones. The really old one that I used a lot is just a very quick visual one. If you add, through the menu, add a new UV sphere, it's just a little ball, it adds a sphere here, and we can set how big we want it to be. This is the radius. The default one is 2 millimeters. Now 2 millimeters is a pretty good default minimum wall thickness. If you make something thinner than 2 millimeters, it could become an issue. That's with current day printers, you know. In some materials you can go very low until 0.3 millimeters. If you want to do full color, 2 to 3 millimeters is a nice limit. So this is a good one to have a look. We could change it. We could make it 1.5 millimeters as well. That means 3 in total. It's radius versus diameter. Let's make it 1 millimeter. The way to measure that I used in the past was you would take this sphere and just put it next or in front or behind the thing you want to check. So I will look at the leg, and if it's sticking out on both sides of the leg must be thinner than 2 millimeters. The same goes for the horns. If I look at this, whatever is thinner than the sphere could be a problem. It's a very cheap, easy visual way to check whether something is thinner or thicker than a specific measurement. Let's get rid of this little sphere now and try a slightly more automated method for checking your wall thickness, and a nice visual one at that. What you do is you select your object in object mode, go to the modifiers panel that's here under the wrench, and I will add a solidify modifier under generate. Add the solidify modifier and make the thickness value in here the minimum wall thickness you're looking for. So I will make it 2 millimeters, and look at the horns. As soon as I apply it, they become a huge blooming mess. The reason is this: we will have a look at what the solidify modifier does in wire mode. This is wire mode. If I drag this around, you can see the wall thickness becomes bigger and smaller. It makes a second skin inside your model at a specific distance from the original skin, so it doubles your model in a way. And if we look at the horns, if it makes that second skin, it keeps going deeper and deeper inside until the second skin is so far from the original outside that it sticks out of the other side of your model. So whenever you see something sticking out of the other side, even at 1.2 millimeters, it's completely obvious it's sticking out of the other side of the model, so it must be too thin there. That brings me to method number 3, which is a much more old school method. In the current version of Blender 2.67 or later, you should have a really cool, nifty new thing called the ruler/protractor, which is a word I can't pronounce because I'm Dutch. If you click on a ruler, you can drag in your screen to measure something. This is really nice. As soon as you click on this, you are pretty much in ruler mode. So we can now modify this ruler, drag points around to measure between 2 points. You can see at the bottom of the screen that we have a bunch of options. One that we can check, you can see here, is thickness. Shift and drag to check thickness. So what happens is, if I drag this end over my model and then click shift, it will check the thickness at the point that I'm at on the model. So we can see, if we zoom in, it becomes clearer. This is 1.02 millimeters across, exactly. If I want to check it here, I can shift drag 1.3 millimeters, 1.1, 1.0, and see it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, even unto 500 micrometers. I don't know personally whether it's really useful, but it's very nice to have the feature. Only 2 more to go. First one is part of a brand new Blender add-on called the Print 3D Tools. You might have already seen it on the left here in my screen. I have a Print 3D tab. If you do not have it, go have a look under File, User Preferences, then look at the Add-ons tab here. Enable all supported levels so that we're looking in everything, and search for print. Hit enter. And it tells me there is a 3D print toolbox. If you have this toolbox, enable it here on the checkbox on the right and save your user settings. Once you've done that, you should have the Print 3D toolbox here on the left. It has a bunch of settings that we can check, and the one we're looking for now is thickness. So I will make this 2 millimeters, and I can check. As soon as I do that, it tells me I have 450 thin faces. That's nice. It's a good statistic to have. I know that something is wrong with my model. To have a look at which faces those are, we can go into edit mode and we do it again. I'll disable this. That's the next one. And it still tells me 450 thin faces. I can check again and it will tell me 441 actually. And it's turned into a button. And because I'm now in edit mode and actually in face select, I can select the thin faces by clicking on this button. So now I can see all of these are an issue. It's a very dirty, quick selection check. If you get this and it tells you 0 faces, you have no problem whatsoever. So it's a lot quicker than looking at the model by hand or trying with modifiers and such. It will just tell you 0 if there's nothing, or it will give you a number if there is something wrong. So here comes the very last and probably funkiest way to check your wall thickness. Let's select nothing on the model with clicking on letter A. And there is a brand new feature on the right here with Mesh Debug. It is an overlay on top of your mesh that can give you information about the state of it. So I will enable this. And already we can see it turns the entire mesh into a nice gray. The gray means this is fine. So everything that's gray should be fine no matter what you're checking for. Be aware that if you have modifiers like I have here on the right, if it is enabled, you can see the mesh debug doesn't work. So be sure you've disabled your modifiers. You can either disable it only for edit mode or just disable the view completely. In this case only for edit mode, because mesh debug only works in edit mode. If we're in object mode we don't see it. We go into edit mode and in this case we want to see about thickness. Now these values, 100 micrometers, is very thin. You can see there is only one face, or there's actually 2 or 3 that are highlighted that could have a problem. What I will do is make the maximum 2 millimeters, and you can see everything that has a wall thickness under 2 millimeters gets a nice color. And we can set a lower limit as well, which is really nice. For instance, I will set it to 1 millimeter. So everything that is less than 1 millimeter becomes completely red. Everything that's less than 2 millimeter gets a color, gradually going from blue to green, which is more of a problem, from green to red, which is really a problem. So red is 1 millimeter and lower in this case. Under 2 millimeters could be the green or these. And we can edit whilst we're looking at this, which is very nice. So I can see there's a problem with the leg. If I go make it thicker by shrinking or fattening it, if I fatten it enough, you can see the value updates automatically. This can make your computer a little bit slow, but it gives you an instant update about whether or not you fixed your problem. And the way to deal with this sort of thing really is to use the mesh debug to fix everything. You just keep this as an overlay to show you whether you're actually fixing the problem. If you want to make sure you fixed everything, you go into the 3D print tools and click on the thickness check. If the result is 0, not 441 as it is in this case, you've really fixed it. This is a nice visual overlay that you use whilst you're editing. The other one is the confirmation. Yes, it is really fixed. You should have enough tools now to see where the problems are in your mesh. I will go record a tutorial now about how to fix them.